I suppose it's time for our nightly routine. Strip. This is something I should be used to by now, right? The words, though spoken with a forced nonchalance, were tinged with an undercurrent of dread. Terriella's heart pounded in her chest, the sound echoing in her ears as if trying to drown out the reality of what was about to happen. Pop, pop, pop. Are you ready? We repeat this ritual every night. The monotonous words felt like a grim lullaby, lulling her into a false sense of normalcy. Yes, as ready as I'll ever be. I'm no stranger to it by now. She swallowed hard, trying to force down the bile that rose in her throat. Gulp. Reach. Her hand moved mechanically, as if driven by an invisible force, but deep down, she knew this would never feel normal. But no, I doubt this will ever feel normal. Ba-bump, ba-bump, ba-bump. Are you still unsure about this? No need to feel anxious, Terriella. The voice in her head, perhaps her own or maybe her mother's, urged her on. Courage, Terriella. Think pure, wholesome thoughts. But the thoughts that filled her mind were anything but pure. Do I really have to endure this every single night? I'm at my wit's end. Courage, Terriella. You mustn't give in to your fate. As long as you live, everything you desire will be yours one day. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, a faint comfort in the darkness of her reality. You trust your mother, don't you? I know how your story ends. I'll ensure your path is lined with flowers. My darling, my favorite, you must survive. These had been her mother's favorite sayings, words that had become a mantra, a lifeline in the storm of her life. But survival came with a price. Terriella, you will travel to the empire of Leonharda as a candidate for the empress's seat. Her father's voice cut through her reverie like a knife, sharp and cold. Respectfully, father, I must refuse. She stood her ground, a rare act of defiance that she knew would be futile. It was as if her mother had known how her father would treat her upon seeing her after years of absence, as if she had foreseen this moment. I'm sure you're aware of the dire situation our kingdom faces, her father continued, his tone leaving no room for argument. The king of Ruffion is relentless. Waves crash against every ship, and the plague spreads, narrowing our safe passageways. It will take at least 2 months to reach the empire. I've almost lost hope for the arrival of the so-called divine maiden at this point. I have no intention of leaving, father. Why must I become the empress of some distant land when I have more eligible sisters? Terriella protested, her voice rising with desperation. Terriella, you already know the answer. Take a look around you. Do any of your siblings seem eligible to you? Her father's words were harsh, unforgiving. My older sister has a fractured arm, my younger sister has a permanent scar on her face, and my older brother has a fractured leg. I acted in self-defense, Terriella muttered, knowing the explanation would fall on deaf ears. You broke your sister's arm, her father accused. Perhaps she shouldn't have pushed me down the stairs, Terriella retorted. I only reached out to grab something to stop my fall, and ended up grabbing her arm, so we both fell down the stairs. The memory of the fall flashed in her mind, but compared to her sister, Terriella had gotten off lightly. One incident could be considered an accident, but how do you explain your brother's sprained ligaments? Again, I was within my rights, father. I saw him trying to kick me, so I grabbed a nearby chair to block his foot, which is how he ended up hurting himself. How unfortunate. Her voice was laced with sarcasm, a thin veil over her frustration. Oh, let's see if you have an excuse for your little sister's scar, her father pressed, his anger mounting. Father, you scarred a debutante's face. Don't you have an apology to make? I believe the apology should come from whoever handed her the bullwhip in the first place. Terriella shot back. My poor sister struck herself in the face while fumbling around trying to hit me. Thankfully, I walked away unharmed, but I shudder to think who might have given a child such a dangerous weapon. There's no need to worry. I'll find the best disguise artist on the continent to hide your scar. Her father's voice dripped with insincerity. I feel like my power should be enough to heal a light scar like that. In theory. Not that I'm particularly inclined to try for her sake. I won't tolerate you sowing discord in my household. How is it possible that all your siblings are so gravely injured, yet you remain unharmed? Her father's eyes bore into hers, searching for answers he could never understand. The answer was simple, yet terrifying in its implication. No one knew, neither her father nor her siblings, about the hidden power she possessed. If it weren't possible, I imagine I wouldn't be standing here, Father. I'm sure I would have died long ago from some mysterious, inexplicable cause, which seems to be the desperate wish of my entire family, might I add. How dare you? This is not up for discussion, her father thundered. I have promised the Empire a princess, and that's exactly what they'll get. I won't hear any more about it. Teriella stood in stunned silence, her mind racing. She was the sole pariah of the royal family, the daughter and sister no one wished to claim. Also, Father, I wonder how dear brother Carrion would feel if you were to send me away without notice. There was one exception, Carrion, the lineal heir to the Ruffian throne and the queen's son. Only her older half-brother truly saw her as family. Or have you forgotten how fond he is of me? Her father scoffed, dismissing her words as a mere bluff. Carrion was sent to a distant province a few days ago to investigate the plague there. Of course, he had been sent away. Her father's scheme had been carefully planned. If only Carrion were here, he would have shielded her from this fate. But her father had made sure to remove the one person who might have protected her. I hear the Emperor of Leonharda is a tyrant who slaughtered half of his vassals as soon as he took the throne, her father continued, his voice dripping with disdain. They say he locks himself in his bedchamber every night and drinks himself into a stupor. He drinks until he has no sense of whether he's standing on the ground or floating in the air. Not only that, when his advisors begged him to fill the Empress's seat, he jumped at the chance to personally inspect the fairest young debutantes throughout his vast empire. But none of them met his lustful gaze, as I hear he sent them all away for one reason or another. A murderous tyrant, a drunkard, and a lecher. Oh, I'm sure there's no finer man on the continent, Teriella muttered sarcastically. He would make a fitting groom for you in that case. After all, your only worth comes from your beauty, just like your mother. It's a fine inheritance she left you, and I intend to make full use of it. Please, Your Majesty, speak plainly. It'll do you good. You hope that I will die in Leonharda, do you not? The words slipped out before she could stop them, a bitter truth that she had always known deep down. Yes, if only you'd been so understanding as a child, it would have saved us all the trouble. I'm not sure why you've lived this long. Your fate was to die young. Do you remember when you almost did? Her father's voice was cold, devoid of any fatherly affection. Your mother somehow nursed you back to life. A pity. The memory of her illness, when she was around 6, flickered in her mind. She had been struck with a severe illness, and the fever had erased much of that time from her memory. You might not regain your memory, my love, but that's all right. Her mother's voice, soothing and gentle, had been her only comfort. This infernal fever erased it from your mind. The fact that you survived is a miracle in itself. It had been her mother's desperate struggle that had saved her, a sacrifice that Teriella could never forget. She had journeyed across mountains and oceans, even to distant lands, to find a cure. To honor her mother's sacrifices, Teriella knew she had to survive, no matter what misery fate threw her way. The matter has been decided. I shall hear no more about it, Teriella. Her father's voice was final, leaving no room for further argument. No matter what happens, I will keep my promise to my mother, she whispered to herself, steeling her resolve. Consider it penance for all the trouble you've caused. Farewell, child. Farewell? Why am I being treated like cattle? Teriella's heart sank as her father continued. I haven't told you when you'll depart. Gasp. The realization hit her like a blow. Surely not. You'll be leaving right this minute. Your carriage awaits. The words were like a death sentence. You. As Princess Teriella stood before the towering figure of the Emperor, her heart raced. That's him, she thought, a chill running down her spine. The Emperor who will go down in history as the most wicked tyrant of all time, Rievenfell von Leonharda. She could hardly believe that this was the man she needed to convince to reject her. Yet, there he stood, his presence as intimidating as the rumors that surrounded him. His voice cut through her thoughts. "You must be the princess from Ruffian?" His tone was authoritative, his gaze sharp. Swallowing her anxiety, Teriella curtsied deeply. "Greetings, your Imperial Majesty. I am Princess Teriella, daughter of the King of Ruffian." Her mind raced as she spoke. Why is he here? To greet me? Or to send me away? "Rise," he commanded, his eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, she hesitated, sensing something different in his gaze. What is this? She wondered. "I've finally found you," the Emperor said, his voice strangely softer, almost tender. "What?" she whispered, startled by his words. "Princess Teriella," he repeated, his eyes unwavering. A sense of unease settled over her. "Something's not right." "Yes, Your Majesty," she replied cautiously. "I'm delighted to welcome you as my bride," he declared, leaving her stunned. Bride? Teriella's mind reeled. Did I hear that correctly? "Your Majesty, I must have misunderstood. Could you please repeat that?" "I'm asking you to marry me, Princess," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Is this real?" She struggled to process his words. "I'm sorry, but I don't think I'm well enough to become an empress," she stammered. "The journey has taken its toll on me." She wished she had consulted a physician before facing this ordeal. The Emperor raised an eyebrow. "Were you expecting me to send you away, Your Majesty?" "Not at all." "How many times must I repeat myself?" he said, a hint of impatience in his tone. "Then, do you really intend to marry me, Your Majesty?" she asked, her voice rising with disbelief. "I'm glad to see your hearing has suddenly improved," he remarked with a faint smile. "But why?" she thought, panic setting in. "Why would he want to marry me? Is this some kind of nightmare? Now that we have our prime candidate for empress, shall we set the date?" The Emperor's aide inquired, breaking the tension. "Of course, my liege. Shall I reserve the earliest available date?" The aide continued. "Nonsense," the Emperor interjected. "Summon the supreme priest and find the most auspicious date. Naturally, the sooner, the better," he added, as if this was all perfectly reasonable. "Do I get a say in this?" Teriella wondered, feeling invisible in the midst of their conversation. "I'm standing right here." The Emperor glanced at her. "Not at all. Find me the soonest, most auspicious date. They say it's better to act quickly, but this is absurd." Her mind raced. Murderous tyrant, drunkard, lecher. He's the worst husband material on the continent. I came here to escape, not to marry some unpredictable thug of an emperor. "Your Majesty," she blurted out, panic overtaking her. "I have no intention of—" "Princess," he interrupted, his gaze intense. "You did come here as a candidate for empress, didn't you?" Ah, reality hit her like a ton of bricks. "That's right. That's why my father sold me to him in the first place." "Where is the princess staying?" the Emperor asked his aide. "In the southern villa within the palace grounds, my liege," came the reply. "That old shack isn't suitable for the future empress of this country," the Emperor remarked dismissively. "Have her moved elsewhere." "To the main palace, perhaps, Your Majesty?" the aide suggested, catching Teriella off guard. "The main palace? Where the Emperor lives. Until a proper room is ready, place her in the imperial guest suite inside the palace," the Emperor ordered. "The imperial guest suite?" the aide repeated, clearly surprised. "But that's where members of imperial families stay, and only on special occasions." The Emperor turned back to Teriella. "I take it you haven't unpacked yet, Princess. Could it be that you rushed here as soon as you arrived? Were you that eager to see me?" Teriella hesitated. Yes to the first question, no to the second, she thought ruefully. "If I'd known this would happen, I would have taken my time and unpacked first. At least I could have delayed this nightmare a little longer." "Did you ride here in that shabby carriage outside?" the Emperor asked, his tone almost mocking. "I mistook it for a farmer's hay cart." "I'm afraid so, Your Majesty," Teriella admitted, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "Are Ruffian's finances running low these days?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "I don't think so, my liege." Not to my knowledge, at least, she replied, trying to maintain her composure. For that matter, Your Highness, the aide interjected. Most of your luggage seems old and broken, almost entirely unusable. Could it be that your luggage was switched with a peasant somehow? Those idiots. Terriella fumed internally. If they were going to hand me over to the Empire, they could have at least sent me with lavish gifts. Did they not consider that the Emperor might be offended by an Empress candidate who doesn't meet his standards? Her anger simmered. They're determined to ruin things until the very end. She glanced at the Emperor, her heart pounding. Look at him. Those are a murderer's eyes. Judging by the look in his eyes, I might as well be asking him to kill me if I refuse his proposal. Desperation clawed at her. Pardon me, Your Majesty, but where might I find the imperial guest suite? She asked, her voice trembling with barely concealed fear. Kara steadied herself, her voice calm as she asked, Where can I find the imperial guest suite? Inside. She was resolute. This is just a tactical retreat for now, she reassured herself. Moments later, attendants surrounded her with offers of luxury. Would you care for a beverage? Perhaps a luxurious bath? A fabulous meal? And an aromatherapy massage? She hesitated, her defenses slightly lowered. I hope this is gentle, she whispered, feeling a rare moment of peace. It's perfect. But then, a sudden wave of fear crashed over her. How frightening. They've lulled me into lowering my guard. What's happening? Even as she indulged in the comforts, her thoughts churned. Is this what life as an empress would be like? The thought of turning away from such luxury was painful, but the alternative was unthinkable. Mother always said I should marry a good man above all else. The sound of a door creaking open snapped her out of her reverie. She turned and saw him standing there. What could be on your mind that makes you look so determined? He asked, his presence sending a chill through her. Did he guess? Kara's heart raced. Am I planning an escape? His voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. I wouldn't advise it. Things wouldn't end well for you. Is he going to use Rufian's fate to blackmail me? She wondered. If that's his plan, he's gravely mistaken if he thinks I care. The Emperor's gaze pinned her in place. Judging by your carriage, your luggage, and even the dress you arrived in, I can't imagine you have much to miss about your family or homeland. Kara gasped, her shock palpable. Did he just read my mind? His tone softened, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. It's not Rufian's future that concerns me, Princess, it's yours. My future? Kara's thoughts spiraled as shadows obscured the Emperor's face, making him appear more menacing than ever. She could no longer decipher his intentions. It would be problematic for you if anyone were to discover that you possess divine powers, he continued, his words sending icy tendrils of fear down her spine. Am I wrong? Something's changed, Kara realized, her heart pounding. This isn't the same man I was speaking to a moment ago. He's different, darker, more dangerous. The world hasn't seen a divine maiden in centuries, he mused, his voice thick with foreboding. Imagine, if you will, what might happen if the temple were to learn of the prophesied one, the one the entire continent has been waiting for. What will become of you then? Kara's heart pounded in her chest as the Emperor's words echoed in her mind. How could he possibly know that? She struggled to comprehend how he had uncovered her secret, the one she had guarded so fiercely. Her siblings' relentless bullying back home had never left a mark on her, not because she was strong, but because she possessed divine powers that shielded her from harm. Her voice trembled as she tried to deny the truth. I am afraid you're mistaken. The Emperor's response was chilling, a cold smile playing on his lips as he dismissed her attempt at denial. That was a poor excuse for a denial. You missed a beat. Panic surged through Kara. How does he know? She wondered, her thoughts racing. Has he planted spies in Ruffian? But that couldn't be. No one in the kingdom had ever suspected her, and she had never even used her divine power. Her body had always healed naturally. The Emperor's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. Are you aware of the continent's political landscape, Princess? Of course I am, she replied, her voice cautious. As we speak, he continued, this continent, this entire world teeters on the brink of collapse. It has been nearly 2 decades since the world tree, the source of all life, withered and died. The gales of death have ravaged the land, bringing plagues, disasters, and endless suffering. He painted a picture of a world in chaos. Crops failing, wildfires raging, savage beasts attacking defenseless villages, and treacherous waves sinking ships. The despair was palpable in his words. "Do you know why the people long for the coming of the divine maiden?" he asked, his tone dark and foreboding. Kara shook her head, barely able to speak. "I'm not the divine maiden," she whispered. Ignoring her denial, he pressed on. "They believe the divine maiden is God's gift to humanity, and that this catastrophe will only end once she is sent back to our Lord and Savior, Samila." Kara recoiled in horror. "What a horrid notion!" she exclaimed, unable to hide her revulsion. The Emperor's expression softened slightly, though his words were still sharp. "Indeed, obsessive and twisted faith is dangerous." Kara clenched her fists, her mind still reeling. How did the Emperor find out that I'm the divine maiden? His conviction was clear. This was no test. She had to be careful, to find a way out of this situation without revealing too much. "Mother, I'm not to blame for breaking our promise. You swore you'd never let anyone find out, but somehow, he did." The Emperor's voice pulled her back to the present. "If you choose to run," he warned, "I'll have no choice but to tell the world what you are." Kara's heart raced. "Is that a threat, Your Majesty?" she asked, her voice shaking. "A threat?" he repeated, his tone mocking. "What an ugly way to put it. I'm merely describing how future events might unfold. Should I beat the Emperor unconscious and make a run for it?" The thought crossed her mind, but before she could act, he continued. "I have no intention of sending you to the temple," he said, stepping closer. "If I had, I would have brought the priest supreme here from the start. What I want is quite the opposite. It would not serve me to let it be known that you possess divine power, princess." Kara's eyes widened as she noticed something strange. How odd. The Emperor had sable hair when I first met him earlier today, but now, could this man be an impostor? As if sensing her thoughts, he began to undress. "Simply put," he said, his tone shifting, "I'm offering to keep your secret intact." Why is he suddenly undressing? Kara's mind spun with confusion. We were just talking about the divine maiden. Is this how he wants me to use my divine power? He stepped closer, his gaze intense. Kara gasped as he took her hand and placed it on his chest, where a strange mark, tree roots inscribed over his heart, was etched into his skin. That mark. Kara's breath caught in her throat as she recognized it. I've heard of it before. She remembered the legend of the alchemist Generva, who had tried to create a new world tree by injecting the essence of the dead tree into human subjects. The experiment, known as the Ferdiac experiment, had ended in disaster, with the subjects' bodies shriveling and dying as if their life force had been drained. "What possible reason could you have to bear this seal, Your Majesty?" Kara asked, her voice trembling. "It's simple," he replied. "I am the first and last person to survive the Ferdiac experiment." Kara's eyes widened in shock. "But don't you know that both Generva's followers and the test subjects have been sentenced to immediate execution if they're discovered?" "Yes, I'm well aware," he said calmly. "Those are the terms of the Continental Peace Treaty that we signed to bring peace in the last days of our world." "Then why would you tell me this now?" Kara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Emperor leaned in, his gaze piercing. "Show me your divine power, princess. Now that we each have the other's secret, we have no reason to be suspicious of one another, do we? But how do I even use my divine power?" Kara wondered, her mind racing. Should I flex my body? Put both of my hands on the mark? He watched her closely, his expression unreadable. "Will you push me away and flee?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Kara flinched, unsure of what to do. "Wait." Suddenly, a soft glow began to emanate from the mark on the Emperor's chest, and Kara felt a strange energy coursing through her. "What in Samila's name?" she whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I told you, didn't I?" the Emperor said gently. "I have no interest in telling anyone that you possess divine power. Instead, I would have you use your power to cure me of my nightly transformation. Kara blinked, her mind struggling to process his words. Pardon, she stammered. I want you to stay by my side, he said firmly, and use your divine power for me, and only me.